Hello and welcome to From the Roots Up, where we're building our homestead little by little from the roots up. I'm Kristy, and today we are going to be pressure canning carrots. It's day 18 in our Every Bit Counts challenge, and so far we've water bath canned, we've pressure canned, we've frozen, we've dehydrated, we've done all sorts of things. Today we're going to go back to pressure canning. It's not as scary as it sounds or it looks. We're going to walk you through step by step, and it does not get easier than pressure canning carrots. Now, with a carrot, the first thing you want to do is to go ahead and peel the carrots, and I'm going to cut them up into little chunks. You can pressure can them with the peels on, but the peel makes them taste bitter, and it gets even more bitter once you can it. I'm going to go ahead and strip that peel off so that my carrots have that nice sweet taste when we pull them out. My carrots are now all peeled. This little peeler is a Rata peeler, and it is the best peeler I've ever had. I will find this and link it in the description below so y'all can find it. It's wonderful and it works really quickly and really well. So the next part of the process is I'm just gonna chop them up however you want them to go in the jars. I'm gonna just chop mine up in little rounds, and actually I'm gonna save some of mine out because later this week I'm gonna be making beef stew. So I wanna go ahead and save some so I don't have to chop that day too, but the rest we're gonna can. The other thing I wanna get started is I want to put the kettle on the stove because I need to get some water boiling to go into these jars. The quickest and easiest way is just to set the kettle on the stove, boil the water in there, and then pour it on top. Before we chop these carrots, be sure to let me know in the comments what your favorite thing you have preserved all month is. I'd love to hear it. All right, that's all the chopping. And now we have this big tub of scraps, and Michaela's gonna take this out to the chickens, aren't you? All these carrots are chopped. Now it's time to pack the jars. All we're going to do, this is super simple, is just put the carrots in the jars. And we want to leave an inch of headspace. Now, the headspace is the distance between the top of the jar and whatever you're canning. So we want to make sure we leave a whole inch. And that's going to be, for these jars, right here at this lip. All right, the next thing we're going to put into these jars is a teaspoon of salt. I'm choosing to can in these quart jars, but you can also can in pint jars. And if you do, just cut the measurement in half. This is canning salt, but really the only difference in canning salt and regular salt is it's plain with no additives, no iodine or anything. And it's a finer grain. Any non-iodized salt will work though. And the last thing we're going to put in the jars is our water. And we're just going to pour it in until we reach that right headspace, which for these is about an inch. Now we're going to take a knife or anything really you can use to poke down in here and make sure there's no big bubbles. And then if you need to add a little more liquid, now's the time. The last thing we're gonna do before we seal the lids is to wipe off the lid and just make sure there's nothing that's going to break that seal. Now, to seal these, you want a new lid, and you're gonna put the lid on, take the ring, and you twist the ring with your fingers until it stops, and then a little bit further. You don't want to wrench down on it with your whole strength, because if you put that much pressure down on it, the actual lid can buckle and it won't seal all the way sometimes. Now we have our carrots in the jar. It's time to pressure can them. This is an all-American pressure canner, and it is sturdy and wonderful. These things are amazing and worth every penny. So they're a little more on the expensive side than some of the cheaper versions, but this thing is gonna last 4 lifetimes. The first thing that you want to do with your All-American pressure canner is, if you notice, there's a little spout right here. This is where we put the weight, but we always want to make sure first that you hold it up to the light and that you can see all the way through that spout. That's gonna let you know if it's got clogged up, you need to unclog it, because that's where part of the pressure is gonna come out. The first thing we need to do is get these jars in here. Now, I have on the bottom the canning rack that came with it. You don't want your jars to sit right on the bottom on the heating element. So I went ahead and put the canning rack on the bottom, and there's 3 or 4 inches of water. You want several inches of water, but you do not want your jars to be covered up. So we can go ahead and put our jars in here on top of that rack. The next thing we want to do is to lubricate around the edges of this so it goes on easier, and this olive oil that we're lubricating with acts as another seal. Every time we use this, we lubricate with the olive oil. And then we put the lid on. If you have the scanner, you'll notice that there's an arrow on the lid, and there's also a little divot right here. And you line those up, and then you twist, and these hooks hook up under the arms. Then what we want to do is take the clamps across from each other and tighten them just finger tight. We want to do this across from each other because we don't want it to be tilted up on one side. We want it to be even all the way across. So we're going to make sure we get it tightened down evenly. We'll do the ones across one more time. And then we can come back and tighten and tighten until they're fairly tight. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to stick this on the stove and set the temperature to high. As soon as this starts spewing steam, we're going to set the timer, and it needs to spew steam for 10 minutes. Once it starts spewing steam, we're going to put the 10-pound weight on. This is 10 pounds for my elevation. You want to check for your elevation, and you can find that on the Ball website, what your canning pressure should be for this project. Once it's spewed steam for 10 minutes, I'm gonna take this 10-pound pressure and I'm just gonna set it on there. Then I'm going to wait until it starts shaking. Once it starts shaking and rattling, then I'm going to set the timer, and that's when my processing time will begin. So if you see a recipe, for instance, this recipe calls for a 30-minute processing time. That's after all of those things have taken place. So this will take significantly longer than just the 30 minutes. Then, once the 30 minutes has happened, I'm just going to turn the stove off and let it sit and let the pressure come back down to 0 before I take it off. So let's get started. Okay, as you can see, the pressure is up to 10, and this little guy is shaking and wiggling, so we are gonna set the timer for 30 minutes. Once we hit 30 minutes, we're gonna turn it off and let it set until the pressure on here is completely at 0. We let the pressure canner go for 30 minutes, and then we turned the heat off and let it come down to 0 pressure. Now we're gonna go ahead and open it and pull out our carrots. And that's all there is to it. Now we'll let them cool on the countertop overnight before we store them. But now we have 5 quart jars of delicious carrots to add to our stockpile. If you've missed any of our videos in this series, I'll be sure to put a link right over here. And if you got some value out of this video, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified when we come out with new content. Thanks for joining us.